Chapter 1: A Childhood in Shadows. My name is Amina, and this is the story of my life, a life that began in the shadows of poverty, but one that has been shaped by perseverance and hope. I was born in a small, remote village where life was harsh and opportunities were few. My family was among the poorest in the village, and from a young age, I understood what it meant to go without. Our home was a small mud hut with a thatched roof, barely holding up against the seasons. The walls were cracked, and when the rains came, we would often wake up to water seeping into our home. My father was a fisherman, but the river near our village was drying up, and each day, he returned home with fewer fish. My mother tried to supplement our meager income by selling vegetables she grew in our small garden, but it was never enough. There were days when we had nothing to eat, and my siblings and I would go to bed with empty stomachs. I was the eldest of 3 children, and I felt a deep responsibility to help my family, even though I was just a child myself. I would wake up early to help my mother in the garden, and in the afternoons, I would assist my father with mending nets. Despite the hardships, my parents did their best to provide for us, and they loved us dearly. Chapter 2: The Dream of Learning. In our village, education was a distant dream for many, especially for girls. Most families couldn't afford to send their children to school, and those who could often prioritized the boys. But I was different. From a young age, I was curious about the world beyond our village. I wanted to learn how to read and write, to understand the stories in the books that I had only seen from afar. I remember the day I first spoke to my father about going to school. He looked at me with sadness in his eyes and told me that we couldn't afford it, but I didn't give up. I continued to ask day after day, until one evening, after a long day of work, he sat me down and said, "Amina, if you truly want to learn, I will do everything I can to make it happen." My heart swelled with hope. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was determined to learn. My father sold his only fishing boat to pay for my school fees, and my mother began working extra hours in the fields. It was a great sacrifice, and I promised myself that I would make it worth their while. The school was far from our home, and I had to walk several miles each day to get there. My shoes were worn and my clothes were old, but I didn't care. I was finally going to school, and that was all that mattered. Chapter 3: A Struggle Against Odds. School was everything I had dreamed of, but it was also challenging. The other children came from better-off families, and they had the luxury of books, stationery, and proper uniforms. I felt out of place at times, but I never let it show. I was determined to learn, to absorb every bit of knowledge I could. I was often the first to arrive at school and the last to leave. I would borrow books from my teacher and stay up late into the night reading them by the dim light of our oil lamp. My mother would scold me, telling me to rest, but I couldn't stop. I had a thirst for knowledge that couldn't be quenched. Despite my hard work, the challenges kept coming. My father's health began to decline due to the years of hard labor, and my mother was exhausted from working day and night. I knew that I had to step up and take on more responsibilities at home. I started working part-time, doing odd jobs around the village to earn a little extra money. It was exhausting, balancing work, school, and household chores, but I didn't complain. I knew I was lucky to be getting an education, and I wasn't going to let anything stop me. But there were days when it all felt too much. There were nights when I cried myself to sleep, wondering if all this struggle was worth it. I felt guilty for wanting more than what I had, for dreaming of a life beyond the poverty that surrounded us. But every time I felt like giving up, I thought of my parents' sacrifices and the dreams they had for me. I couldn't let them down. Chapter 4: A Glimmer of Hope. As I approached the end of my schooling, I began to think about what would come next. I wanted to continue my education, to go to college and learn more, but I knew it was a distant dream. College was expensive, and we barely had enough money to survive. But fate has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. One day, a group of volunteers came to our village, offering scholarships to students who showed promise but couldn't afford to continue their education. I applied, even though I thought I had little chance of being selected. I poured my heart into the application, telling my story and explaining why education was so important to me. Months passed, and I heard nothing. I began to lose hope, thinking that perhaps my dream of going to college was just that, a dream. But then one day a letter arrived. It was from the scholarship committee, and as I read the words on the page, tears streamed down my face. I had been selected. I was going to college. It was a moment of pure joy, not just for me, but for my entire family. My parents hugged me tightly, and for the first time in a long while, I saw a glimmer of hope in their eyes. I knew that this was my chance to change not just my life, but theirs as well. Chapter 5: The City and Its Challenges. Leaving my village for the city was a daunting experience. The city was vast, noisy, and overwhelming, unlike anything I had ever known. But it was also full of opportunities, and I was eager to start my new life. College was everything I had hoped for and more. The classes were challenging and the workload was heavy, but I was in my element. I loved learning new things, meeting new people, and discovering the world beyond the boundaries of my village. But the city had its own challenges. Money was tight, and I had to find a part-time job to cover my living expenses. I worked as a cleaner in a small restaurant, scrubbing floors and washing dishes after my classes. It was hard work, and there were times when I was so tired that I could barely keep my eyes open during lectures. Despite the exhaustion, I kept pushing forward. I knew that every challenge I faced was a stepping stone towards a better future. I was determined to make the most of the opportunities one had been given. Chapter 6: Finding My Voice. As I continued my studies, I discovered a passion for writing. It started as a way to cope with the loneliness and homesickness I felt in the city. I began writing about my experiences, about the struggles I had faced, and the dreams I had for the future. I wrote about my family, my village, and the people who had shaped my life. Writing became my escape, my way of making sense of the world around me. I started sharing my stories with others, and to my surprise, people were moved by what I had to say. They saw themselves in my words, and I began to realize that my story wasn't just my own. It was the story of many people who had faced similar struggles. Encouraged by the positive response, I started writing more seriously. I wrote essays, articles, and short stories, drawing from my own life and the lives of those around me. My writing began to gain recognition, and I was invited to speak at events and share my experiences with others. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had a voice, and that voice mattered. I wasn't just the poor girl from the village anymore. I was a writer, a storyteller, and an advocate for those who didn't have the chance to tell their own stories. Chapter 7: Giving Back. After graduating from college, I knew I wanted to use my education and my voice to give back to my community. I returned to my village, not as the poor girl who had left, but as someone who had achieved something. I wanted to share what I had learned with others, to help lift them out of the shadows of poverty. I started a small school in my village, where I taught children how to read and write. I focused especially on the girls, knowing firsthand the challenges they faced. I wanted to show them that they could dream big, that they could achieve anything they set their minds to, just as I had. My school grew, and soon we had more students than we could accommodate. I started reaching out to organizations and donors, raising funds to expand the school and provide scholarships for the brightest students. It wasn't easy, but I was determined to make a difference. I also continued writing, sharing the stories of the people in my village with the world. My work was published in newspapers and magazines, and I even wrote a book about my life. The book became a bestseller, and the proceeds helped fund the school and other community projects. Chapter 8: A Legacy of Light. Years have passed since I first left my village to pursue my education. The small mud hut where I grew up is still standing, but now it is surrounded by a thriving community. The school I started has grown into a beacon of hope for the village, and many of the children who have passed through its doors have gone on to achieve great things. Subscribe for more videos. Your support helps me create more content. Thanks for watching.